Welcome to Called to Homeschool with your host, Meg Thomas. I am a mother of 7 with 5 homeschool graduates. Each week, we'll talk about real life homeschool, mindset shifts, and practical tools you can use in your home. Because homeschooling isn't just about school, it's about restoring the family. Hello, welcome back to another episode of Called to Homeschool. Always excited to be here. I am Meg, the homeschool guru, and I love talking all things homeschool. It is the middle of summer, and hope you're doing well, planning your school year. I've been working on mine, and I'm really excited. I've also been helping a lot of my clients create their homeschool year, so hopefully you're doing well. Well, guess what today is? July 15th, yes, which is my 26th wedding anniversary. So go us. Super exciting. We've done a lot in our 26 years, moved a lot. Actually, just around Utah County, not even out of Utah County. We've moved around. We've had 7 babies. We have a grandbaby with another grandbaby on the way. So, really exciting stuff. So, I know I did a special episode for Father's Day. So, I'm not going to be doing it specific to a lot of the things that I covered in that episode, which is episode number 369, which was the 6 marriage skills from the empowered wife. But I did want to kind of do one that was about your spouses and relationships, because a question that I've been seeing a lot in different homeschool Facebook groups, a lot of people just really struggling with their marriage and husband. They feel like their husband isn't very supportive of their homeschooling. So, because it's my anniversary, I'm going to do another little off tangent podcast episode. And sorry, I'll start answering questions again next week. But I really wanted to do this because it's something that I've been seeing a lot of, especially in different Facebook groups. So when you feel like your husband isn't supportive of your homeschool. So if you remember, I'm on a mission to restore family. And it's kind of hard to do if you and your husband are fighting all the time. You don't like each other, because homeschooling really is just a part-time gig, because your babies grow up and leave. And so I want you to make sure that you guys are on the same page. And this can feel really challenging if you guys are disagreeing or fighting a lot with homeschool. So I want to dive into this today, because if you feel like your husband isn't supportive in your homeschool, you probably feel lonely, maybe angry too, but probably lonely, because homeschooling is such a big part of your daily life. And when you feel like your husband is not on the same page, it can create frustration, resentment, and even doubt in yourself and your abilities, whether or not you can do this. So today I'm going to share a bunch of ideas that can help you and your family. And the goal is not to convince your husband that homeschooling is the right choice. The goal is to strengthen your marriage while creating the best education for your children. So I want you to make sure you have that clear distinction. So let's dive in. So I want you to first to not confuse concern with opposition. So one of the things I hear is, my husband is not supportive of homeschooling. Sometimes that's just not true. But many times what moms actually mean is, my husband doesn't support homeschooling in the way I think he should. Because sometimes we have lots of stories of what we think our husband should be doing and how he should be supporting us. And those are two very different problems. Your husband may not be against homeschooling at all. He may simply be worried. Like many of us were in the very beginning, especially if you're a first generation homeschooler. He might be worried because it's maybe not what he knows or is comfortable with, or he knows a homeschool family he thought was weird, right? So he could be worried. And so he's asking himself, are the kids learning enough? Are they going to be prepared for college or a career? Are they going to make friends or be social outcasts? Is my wife going to be too overwhelmed with this? So many husbands naturally move into problem solving mode when they hear a problem or your complaints. So if you're saying, oh, I'm just so overwhelmed, he may hear, please help me solve this. And his solution might be, maybe the kids should just go back to school. This doesn't necessarily mean he's rejecting homeschooling. He may be trying to solve what he sees as the problem. And here's something important. Sometimes he really is trying to fix your stress. Other times he may have legitimate concerns that do deserve to be explored together. Instead of immediately assuming he doesn't believe in you or thinks you're failing, get curious. Ask him questions like, tell me more about your concerns. So many times when I've worked with clients, and it's just like, what are his actual concerns? And maybe it's socialization of like, okay, what are your concerns? That they wouldn't have any friends. Okay, so how could we solve that problem then? Okay, we can do co-ops. We go to church groups. We have an extracurricular activity, whatever it is, the neighbor kids, right? Like, let's solve that together. So just by getting actually curious and saying, what are your concerns, is a great way to see how your husband, like what your husband is actually worried about. Another Good question you could ask is what makes you feel like we're not on the right track, right? So if he's like, we're not doing enough school, he's like, I don't know, kids, and this is another concern I've had, and I don't remember the exact number, but kids are in school 6 to 8 hours a day, and you're doing school for 1 hour, right? Of just like, let's do the research on that. Well, they're trying to teach 30 kids a concept. And yes, that does take a lot longer. And I'm only teaching one kid second grade math. So it does only take 15 minutes. So that's why. And then you can actually dive into, and it's really interesting if you go down into like what the school day looks like, what they're actually spending their time doing. And it's how many times do they have to line up? How many times do they have to clean up an area? How many times, right? And so they're not actually learning during all of that time. So another thing that you can explore, and you want to make sure you're not doing this out of when you're defensive, right? Because you're like, oh my goodness, let me show you, right? So just really getting curious and having actual kind conversations. You could even ask questions. Is there something you suggest that we should do in our homeschool, right? Of just getting curious about maybe some of his thoughts, because curiosity will strengthen your marriage far more than defensiveness ever will. And remember, your husband doesn't have to homeschool exactly the way that you would. He gets to have his own thoughts about your family's education too. They are his children too. The goal isn't to convince each other who's right. It is to work together to create the best environment for your children. So this is brings us to a next point too is making sure that you're not treating your husband like your therapist. So if every time your husband comes home from work or you see him at night or whenever you guys are crossing paths and you are just complaining and venting, this curriculum isn't working. This kid refused to do the math. These ones are fighting. I think this one's behind. I don't know if I'm doing enough. Guess what? Eventually, he's going to conclude homeschool isn't working. And that doesn't mean you shouldn't be honest or lie to your husband, but you should be intentional. So maybe processing these frustrations with another homeschool mom. A coach is a really great place because if you get with another homeschool mom who's also in a really negative space, like if you have a neutral homeschool mom who can just listen and just be like, oh, sorry, that sounds rough. I love you so much. I've been there too. Great. If not, come and talk to a coach where you can just vent, right? And just being like, I love you and I hear you and you've got this. Lots of times journaling it, right? So it doesn't mean storing it all in and just pretending there's nothing wrong, but your husband doesn't need to hear the daily frustrations because it's going to make it really exhausting for him, especially when his brain often goes to problem solving. So when you do talk with your husband, you need to share the victories too, because I'm willing to bet good money your whole day was terrible. So just because somebody threw a fit over math doesn't mean that everything was bad. What were the good parts, right? So where are you sharing the victories? And this is really like whatever you look for grows, the good or the bad. So talking to him about maybe projects that you made, or oh my goodness, we had the coolest discussion during lunch today. It was so fun. The kids did this way funny thing. I loved it so much. Tell them about the book everyone loved, right? So instead of people weren't getting their stuff down, what was going well? Help him see the fruit of homeschooling, not just the hard parts. And there is a time and a space, right? Of like open coming to him, but often husbands go to problem solving. And so unless you don't want a problem solved, like if you just want to vent, a girlfriend or a coach, a journal are sometimes a better place. If you do want a problem solved and you want that vulnerability and that connection with your husband, then go to him. But make sure he's seeing the good parts too and not just you venting all the time. So this is another thing with keeping peace with your marriage, and so like husbands and everything with this. And this is another concern I hear is that sometimes moms feel like they have to become experts in everything because sometimes the husband be like, our kids really need to learn physics. So mom's like, great, I've got to understand physics now, right? My husband really loves languages. And you know what's funny is that I don't even think he told me like you should be doing this, but like I just really wanted to make him happy and really wanting our kids to learn Greek because he was learning Greek and he thought it'd be good for our kids to learn Greek. And so I started to teach Greek and I didn't love it and it wasn't serving us, right? So if there is a subject that your husband really wants to be taught, it does not have to be your responsibility. Maybe he teaches it. And you know, it's interesting as our kids got older, my husband has taught them a lot about languages, but it's not the way I would do it. And it is not like Mondays at 10 a.m. And a lot of times it was just random times throughout the week, always at night, a lot of times on Sunday nights. But he taught three of our kids Spanish. and was really involved with it. And so, like, he took it over and did it his way, and it was awesome. If there's another subject where he's like, I really want him to learn this, but I don't have the time to teach it, still give him the opportunity to find, like, then what do you suggest is the best way we do it? And once again, not in a defensive, passive aggressive, but like, well, that's great. Physics sounds super exciting. What do you suggest? There are online classes. Do you want to hire a tutor? Is there an in person class that you want to find? Right. But giving that back to him and realizing you don't have to take on every single thing, just like he doesn't have to take on every single idea and thought you have. One of the biggest mindset shifts for me was realizing that homeschooling doesn't mean that I have to personally teach every single subject, especially if my husband's like, I really think you should do this. My job is to make sure my children are learning, not that I'm the one teaching every lesson. And sometimes that means that it's dad or another teacher, and that's okay. So, we really want to work on, if you've noticed this theme, of not getting defensive. Because when we are getting defensive, we are like, there is a thought back there, right? That he doesn't think I'm good enough, whatever those thoughts are. So, suppose your husband says, I don't think you're doing enough school. A lot of people immediately think he doesn't understand. He's judging me. He doesn't know how hard this is, whatever your thought is when you're getting defensive. But before you dismiss it, ask yourself this question: could he be right? Now, that takes a big piece of humble pie to look at, to ask yourself a question like that. And I think there's a lot of power in doing that. And sometimes you may need a minute and you may not be able to do it right away. And so maybe he says, like, I don't think you're doing enough school. And so maybe in that moment, you could be like, interesting. Let me think about that. Because maybe you want to say mean things, or you want to get defensive, you want to start a fight, and instead just walk away and think about it for a minute, and then maybe allow yourself to be mad for a minute and process it. But then when you can get past that of, could he be right? Now, he may not be, but don't let that defensiveness keep you from considering that there might be something you could improve. Maybe you've gotten a little too relaxed. Maybe you've become really inconsistent. Maybe you've been meaning to add in writing or math, or thinking about it. You realize, no, I actually feel really good about where we are. It's interesting because back when I first started homeschooling, I had some people in my life also start homeschooling. And it was interesting because one of these husbands was like, she's not doing enough. Like, they're not really doing any homeschool. Our kids aren't learning. And I would watch her get really, really defensive with this. And it's interesting because I was a third party bystander. And from my point of view, it also didn't look like they were doing very much. And it was interesting that this mom did not make it a priority, and a lot of things would take place of homeschool. And so a husband, lots of times, is just concerned about also their child's education. And so if she could have taken a step back and just like, oh, okay, then maybe I need help in this area. And she was still helping her husband run his business. And so maybe like, hey, you need to hire this out in your business so that I can focus on school, or we hire a tutor so I can still help you here, but I can't do both. And so sometimes, like, there's a lot of growth in looking at something and getting really curious instead of defensive. And so even if like, and if you feel like you are doing like enough with school, then making sure you're pointing it out in the day or the nighttime of those positive things, because maybe they're very used to reading from a textbook and taking a test. And so they don't think you going to museum counts as school. Right. So sometimes you're just showing them like, hey, we learned about this cool thing. We went to the butterfly biosphere. We got to see butterflies. And then we watched a YouTube video about butterflies. It was so cool. Right. So then obviously it's like, oh, they're learning all the time. But we want to be really careful that we're separating facts from the stories we tell ourselves. So if a husband says like, you need to be doing more school, that's just the fact. The story then is either like he thinks I'm a terrible homeschool mom and then you get defensive, or is it like I'm going to get curious and like maybe he could be right, right? And so just allowing you that curiosity instead of getting really worked up over those things. Now, this is interesting. A thing that I really love from The Empowered Wife. Really recommend that book. If you haven't bought it yet, please go do it. But stating your desires instead of making requests or complaints. And this is really, really helpful. And she calls it stating your desires in a way that inspires. And it's such a simple shift, but it changes the entire tone of a conversation. So instead of saying, like, you need to help out more, you need to teach the subject, or you never help me in my homeschool, you simply share what you do want. So, first of all, you need to know what you want. You might say, I would love for the kids to have a really strong science education, or I would love more help. I would love a clean home while I'm homeschooling. I would love the kids to have more experiences with you. Do you hear the difference? You're not assigning a job or telling him how to do it. You're not criticizing. You're not telling him what he should do. You're simply sharing your heart. And people are much more inspired to do something when they're connected with somebody and they present it this way more than when they feel obligated or forced. Because when someone feels controlled, they usually resist. When they feel invited, especially a husband, they're much more likely to step in. So maybe your husband hears you say, I would love for the kids to learn woodworking. Instead of feeling like he's been handed another responsibility, he might think, I could teach that, or I could find someone who could do that. And a lot of times with desires, you have to let go of like how he does it. Like, I think he should teach the woodworking, right? But instead he's like, no, I could find somebody for that. I have a buddy who does that. Or there's this nice old grandpa down the street who could do that, right? Maybe that is, I think you should help more around the house. That he said, I'd be happy to hire a cleaner. Or they're like frozen meals that can get sent to your house and you pop them in the crock pot if you're like, I would love more help with making the meals or whatnot. And so letting go of how it gets done. And so lots of times when husbands feel respected and they feel like they have a voice, they want to make their wives happy. And then when he does do the thing that you asked, make sure you appreciate him and let him know how happy you are that he did that for you. Thank you so much for hiring this person. Thank you so much for doing this so that I could just focus on our homeschool. Thank you for doing this. So simply state your desire and letting go of the outcome because it is freeing. And as you continue to give gratitude when he does fulfill the desires, guess who wants to do more things to make you happier? Your husband. So I want you to remember to stay on the same team and that your husband is not your enemy. The goal is not to win the homeschool debate. The goal is to create a family where both parents feel heard and respected. Sometimes that does mean tell me more, help me understand, and people become much more willing to listen when they feel understood first. And another coaching principle that I really love is focus on what you can control. And that makes everybody's life 1,000 times better because you can't control whether your husband loves homeschooling. Maybe he does think it's weird. And you can't control whether he agrees with every decision. But you can control whether you become defensive, whether you listen, whether you complain, whether you ask for help, whether you do put your whole heart into it and do a really good job. Continue learning and improving. Your peace doesn't have to depend on his agreement. And if anything, I've really learned as I've studied coaching and marriage stuff is you need to be in charge of your own happiness and your own mood and allow your husband space to be in charge of his. So really staying in your own lane and owning what is yours. So friends, if you are feeling discouraged because your husband isn't as excited about homeschooling as you are, I want you to remember this. He doesn't have to feel excited about it. He gets to feel however he wants, and you also get to choose how you want to feel. Your marriage is so much more important than winning the homeschool argument. You're not trying to create the perfect homeschool. You're trying to build a strong family. And sometimes that means listening more than getting defensive. Sometimes it means accepting feedback. Sometimes it means allowing someone else to teach a subject. And sometimes it simply means remembering that you and your husband are on the same team, even when you see things differently. Curiosity creates connection. Defensiveness creates distance. The next time you find yourself wanting to prove your point, pause and ask yourself instead. It just might change the conversation. Because at the end of the day, the relationship you build with your spouse is one of the greatest gifts you can give your children because it helps them in their own relationships, in their life, and for their future. Friends, thank you so much for coming for the special episode. Happy anniversary to us, to my husband and me. Thanks for all of his support. He listens to some of these episodes. So, John, if you're listening, thank you for everything of being the best supportive, wonderful man ever. And thank you all for being here today. And I will talk to you all next week. Have a good one. Thanks so much for listening to Call to Homeschool. If today's episode was helpful, the best way you can support the show is by leaving a rating or review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It helps more homeschool moms find this work, and I appreciate it so much.